Can I start with you, Laurie? Is it 1 minute to midnight for climate?
I don't think that's a very useful way to describe it, but we are at the point now where serious, coordinated global action to get emissions down to net zero has to happen in the next couple of decades.
Is it 5 to 12, quarter to 12, half 10?
I don't think the clock analogy is very useful. There is no sort of cliff edge moment where the whole world will end overnight that's going to happen. Things will just get worse, and ultimately much, much worse if we don't take action now. And we've already seen severe impacts happening around the world, which were predicted a long time ago, and worse impacts will happen into the future. So it's the absolute crunch point moment.
Laurie, hypothetically, if we did nothing for 50 years, the planet would still exist?
There would be a rock orbiting the sun. It would probably still have oceans on it. Would it have organised societies where we enjoy the standard of living that we do in this country? It is arguable whether that would be the case if we did nothing for the next 50 years. Would we see horrendous impacts around the world, including falling on the people who've contributed least to the problem and are already in severe poverty and other things? We absolutely would. So we've already seen some of the impacts now. So we have to act. Now is the key moment, and we need meetings like Glasgow, but not just Glasgow, to be positive in that they come away with agreements that speed up action to sort out this problem. And as a last thing, that action, the kind of things that we need to do to deal with the environmental emergency, are precisely those that we could have been doing anyway to realise a healthier and more equal world.
David Opik, the data doesn't lie. The planet is heating up.
I'm sure I would like Laurie if I met you socially, but it's rubbish what you said. If you actually look at the history of the human race, we've actually lived through a bit of an ice age. We had nothing to do with that. If you look back about 140 million years, there is no serious relationship between CO2 and ice ages and warmings. I'm sure you've heard of the Milankovitch cycles. I've mentioned them on GBNews before, the way the Earth goes around the sun. That's far more significant than CO2. CO2 seems to be a lag factor. More importantly, CO2 is a fertilizer. And CO2, if it goes below a certain level, will kill us all, around 100 to 150 parts per million. We've been dangerously close to that in the past. Let me just make this really simple and not that scientific. This climate emergency is not happening. The biggest concern we should have is the next glaciation. And I'm sure, Laurie, and I'm sure Donnchadh, who it's great to see you again, you understand that we're in an interglacial phase. The big danger for us is the ice sheets coming down again. CO2 is not driving the end of the world. This is a religion. We're all going to die. It's your fault. But if you repent, then you will be saved. And I'll ask you, Laurie, and you, Donnchadh, to explain why, at the height of the Younger Dryas ice age, and you'll know about this because clearly you're speaking about the science here, why at the coldest point in the Younger Dryas ice age, CO2 was at least the same level as it is now.
Donnchadh?
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for having me on. This year in Canada, temperature records were broken by 5 degrees centigrade. Not by 1 degree, 2 degrees, 5 degrees centigrade. That led to horrific wildfires. It's led to the collapse of the wheat crop. The durum wheat cost now globally is 50% up, meaning many poor people who are dependent on wheat for their staple diet are now having to pay more. This is in 2021. If we continue the way we go, it's very clear. The Chatham House report commissioned by the Foreign Office last month stated very clearly that if we go ahead unrestricted with carbon emissions, we're facing a potentially simultaneous failure in a number of our food baskets. Think of what that would mean for civilization. You have seen this year the impacts of inflation on our economies. If we get disastrous crops simultaneously in our food baskets, think of what that would mean for food inflation and for hundreds of millions of people across the planet. This is alert danger. Look at China. Normally when you have water and flood rainfall records broken. They're broken by 1 degree, 2 degree, 3%. In China, over a couple of days, they had an entire year's rainfall fall in 3 days. It is clear we're in the middle now of the emergency and we've got to act. And thank God the Prime Minister is finally beginning to use the language that needs to be used to wake up the public. Boris Johnson's not a political ally of mine in terms of what my politics are. But if you look at his hero, Churchill, this is a moment where he needs to emulate Churchill and summon the British people and the world to act urgently because the science is very clear.
OK. Thank you, Donnachie. Lembit, is Boris Winston Churchill or Neville Chamberlain?
He'd like to be. What I'm very pleased...
Is he Lembit OPEC?
Well, no one could be as great as me. I'm sure Donnachie would agree. Donnachie and I go back a long way, and I regard you as a friend. And for that reason, I want to ask you a direct question, Donnachie. If you believe what you've just said, you have to understand the science. 2,000 years ago, the south of England had a climate the same as the Mediterranean. What caused that? And do you think we can stop it now?
Look, we've had in these crazy crackpot conversations for decades.
Do you accept?
It's very clear.
That
it's very clear.
The
entire consensus
and the Roman warm period was warmer than it is now. That's a yes/no question. Listen to your answer. Do you accept that it was warmer then than it is now?
Actually, for the last million years, we have never had this level of CO2 and the highest temperature rise we've had in thousands of years. Let's move on to the real debate that we need to be happening is how do we deal with the crisis, not whether we have a crisis or not. Because if you love Britain, and if you want to protect this country's shores, and you want to protect the economy and poor people both in Britain and around the world, we have to act and we need to move on to the debate. How do we deal with this in a fair way that's fair to poor people and doesn't bankrupt the country? That's the conversation we need to be having.
Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt again. Donnachie, I completely agree with you on a core point there. We haven't had this level of CO2 for a long time. We can argue if it's 11 or 12,000 years ago, but certainly not in the last 2,000 years. Totally agree. We finally found a point of agreement. And yet the Roman warm period was warmer than it is now. So you and I have to agree, obviously, that CO2 is not driving this agenda. What is?
Sorry, do we really have to engage in crackpot science?
Yes, we have to
John
agree.
Tyndall, a famous Irish scientist working in Bermondsey in London, discovered in the 1850s that CO2 as a gas traps heat. Scientific fact. Let's move on and talk about how do we solve this? How do we actually fund the installation for poor people in homes across Britain?
Okay.
How do we actually make our cities
We don't
cleaner?
lie down on a motorway, but look, Laurie, I hope you're not feeling left out. Laurie, you've been playing gooseberry in this particular debate, and I'll come back to you. I mean, is it not important, Laurie, that we hear divergent scientific voices on this?
Yeah, 100%. And I, with all respect, Lembit, and Lembit's view is not the divergent scientific view, right? There's a whole process that goes behind producing these summary reports that come out every number of years, and we have one this year from the UN science body, right? A vast amount of divergent science, constantly competing against each other, fighting, some papers being withdrawn because someone's contested it successfully, that lead up to this finessed summary of the science. And we get it every few years. And the last one we got this year was absolutely unequivocal that human actions are leading to an increase in emissions in the atmosphere, which then is leading to an increase in temperature, which is then leading to these negative impacts. And of all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of scientists and organizations and bodies that contribute to these reports, Lembit OPEC is not the person that's found a fatal flaw in the evidence and has managed to smash the entire scientific consensus, which all of this stuff is built on, and is the reason why global leaders are convening at this very moment.
This is rubbish.
Laurie, I hear what you're saying, Laurie, but in my view, we've received a bum steer from mainstream scientists when it comes to COVID. The science is regularly deployed by politicians around the world to justify lockdowns, but the data is in now, and there's a healthy debate to be had about why some countries that didn't have measures have a similar trajectory on the graph to those that did. But we're not here to discuss COVID, but it raises the question about the veracity of the science. So, Lembit, back to you.
OK.
Well, hang on. Can we...
Sorry, Laurie, after you. Because
OK, Laurie, you make your point, and then Lembit, and then the clock's against us. So
thank you.
It's 1 minute to midnight, folks.
Let me make this point. I assumed you would agree with Donoghue, McCarthy, that CO2 levels were not as high 2,000 years ago as they are now. I assume you wouldn't be dumb enough to deny the existence of the Roman warm period when the south of England had a Mediterranean climate. Now, neither of you have explained that. We actually all agree. CO2 is not the prime driver. We've had CO2 1,200 parts per million, which is 3 times what we've got now during ice ages. When it comes to, listen, I was polite enough to...
There's no peer review. We're talking about science, let's talk about peer review.
Talk over me.
Have you a journal, have you a paper in a journal that backs up that nonsense?
OK, Donoghue, you can tell me it's nonsense, but let me finish my point.
We need a peer-reviewed science. If you're going to spout on national TV,
CO2 was lower when it was warmer in Britain the last time round. There is no direct correlation that shows that CO2 drives the climate. It's a lag factor. And the problem is we are destroying our way of life because people like you have turned CO2 into a religion. And the problem is, the big problem is that we're...
The religion is actually quoting...
Lembit, the extreme weather. We know that it gets windy and rainy in the UK. And, of course, ridiculously, the Channel 4 news presenter Jon Snow yesterday blamed a falling tree on the rail line from Euston up to Glasgow as being as a result of global warming and of climate change, which is obviously ridiculous. But we are seeing extreme weather moments now. Something's going on, Lembit, and we have to wake up and accept that.
I promise to be brief here, because I know that Laurie and Donoghue will want to say something.
Let's talk about the floods. Let's talk about the forest fires.
The actual reality is fewer people are dying from climate-related incidents now than in the history of the human race. There are not more hurricanes. There are not more monsoons. If you're watching at home, just go to the internet and have a look at a credible source on that. This is
the World Meteorological Organization, like the International Climate Change, like Chatham House,
but I want you,
like the UK government,
come into the
like the
studio,
Foreign
you've got the courage
Affairs.
to do it.
Name one of
Put
them.
your data on the table, and if you're right, I will change my view, and I will say here, live on GB News, I was wrong, and human beings are changing the climate.
Is your position wishful thinking? There's no climate change, nothing to see here.
Mark, I had my first article published on this issue, on climate change, in 1980, 41 years ago. And that doesn't make me an expert, but it does make me a practitioner. And when it comes down to it, here's the fundamental answer to your question, Mark, and to you, Laurie, and you to Donoghue. I don't want to be rude to you, because I'm actually fascinated by...
Be rude, it's the clash. Come on.
OK, then. You're both wrong. And Mark is a great moderator. But when it comes down to it, my father was a physicist. My grandfather was an astronomer. I grew up with science. And as far as I'm concerned, I want to be right. And if you can make me more right, you come and have the courage to sit on the sofa with
the idea you've got somebody spouting this
by
stuff
CO2
without able to quote any peer-reviewed journal science shows the problem
on that.
But Donoghue, isn't the problem, and we love having you on the show, by the way. I love that fabulous Irish accent of yours. It reminds me of my parents. But the bottom line is you're shutting Lembit down. You're gaslighting him, calling him a crackpot. That's not the kind of discourse we need, is it?
Well, I think when you've got people coming on spouting non-peer-reviewed science is really dangerous. If Lembit has got a peer-reviewed research and document that are actually from universities that are reputable, then come onto this show. But having this sort of crackpot science is not acceptable,
But he's
Mark.
not,
I think
he's not on his own,
the issue
Donoghue.
is too serious.
Lembit is not alone in thinking that this has been oversold by the Green lobby.
Well, you talk to the people who actually are paying the price for increase in wheat prices. Talk to the people who died in fires in the Mediterranean. Talk to the people who died in Germany. And what are we going to do to future generations? Say, oh, Lebedopic quoted a non-peer-reviewed science on a TV program.
Donoghue, it's very
serious.
simple.
Mark, you said that you care about
live on air
nature.
on GB News. Share your data. Will you do it? Yes or no?
Look, can I come in and look?
Help me out here. Laurie, I'm very happy. Throw me a bone.
I'm very happy any time to come in and bring. I'll print them out. I'll make them a bit bigger so we can see them better on the camera. I'll print out the graphs from the IPCC, from the World Meteorological Organization, if you want. This is the best science in the world. It's all peer reviewed. It all shows, for example, that CO2 is at the highest level it's been for a very long time, including more than 2,000 years. But some of the issues we've raised over the course of this program, I think really the ones that any viewers of GB News and anyone else really cares about, which is that some politicians are not giving the leadership that we want on this issue. We don't want the kind of hypocrisy and ridiculous things that we've seen in the context of this summit. And we should and can have different politicians. We can vote them out. Also, we have governments who are not delivering the kind of strategies that we need to deal with the issue, but do it in a way that doesn't impact people, that makes people poorer or the world more unequal. The British government right now, for example, could invest far more money in helping people make the transition away from their drafty and uninsulated homes, and also in moving away from vehicles that cause air pollution, which affects their kids' health. But it's not taking the kind of actions, making the kind of investments that are needed. And before someone comes back and says, oh, well, at the end of the day, the taxpayer's going to have to pay for this, we have to understand that COVID has shown us something, right? Which is when we face an emergency, like we do with the environmental crisis, governments can step in and take extraordinary action.
More's the pity, Laurie. More's the pity. 2 trillion quid's worth of national debt, one of the highest COVID death tolls in the world. That's the problem.
But, Mark, you've created something special here. Donoghue doesn't want to be involved in this. I respect that. Donoghue, you have a different agenda. Laurie, I look forward to meeting you here. We can talk beforehand, and then we can put your case and my case live in front of GB News viewers, which is anybody who wants to watch. And if you're right, I promise you one thing. I will change my view live on air on one condition, that we actually look at each other's data with respect.
Laurie, a final thought on this. What about the democratic aspect of it? Do you not think that there should be a referendum, or it should be part of a general election campaign if politicians want to have these measures?
Well, I mean, for net zero, getting to net zero itself, that was very clearly marked in the Tory manifesto 2019, and people overwhelmingly voted to elect the Conservative Party. When it comes to the various issues of what we do, what action that we take to get to net zero, I think there does need to be much more debate. I think we need political parties who are stepping up and saying the government has not done this right. It could have invested more money earlier on to transition to more insulated homes. I know we get a bit sensitive as we get talking about this because of Britain's tactics and stuff, but that should have happened early, and it would have been good for people even without the environmental imperative to do so. And when it comes to more democratic involvement, I'm in favour of citizens' assemblies. I think there should be more direct contact with people across the country, not about the silly debates about whether the science is real or not, but about how local places deliver the measures in their area that both deal with the emergency, get us to net zero, as well as make people's lives happier and healthier, which are exactly the kind of win-win we can do by delivering action that we need to deal with the climate.
Well, I think that strikes the right note to engage with the British people, Laurie, who will be paying for this and who will, suffer any negative consequences. Very briefly, with the clock against us, Donoghue, it's now 30 seconds to midnight. Final thoughts, please.
Yeah, well, I thought the point about actually the Citizens' Assembly was well made. For example, the Citizens' Assembly proposed that there should be a tax on frequent flyers and on private jets, which is the point we started off about, the hypocrisy. I'm agreeing with you on, Mark. I'm a Gandhian. Gandhi said, be the change we wish to see in the world. And we need politicians doing that. And I try to practice in my own life. I'm not a meat eater. I don't drive and I don't fly for holidays. So I try and practice what I preach. I think that's a good message to finish.
You sound like a barrel of laughs.
That's not fair. I actually think
I have great holidays.
I'm only pulling your leg. Listen,
I may disagree with him, but
what a really healthy debate. I want to thank each and every one of you because it's an important conversation to have, and you've all contributed in a respectful and constructive way.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.